On your Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors, in the last year, we've seen Kelly Olynyk be very good for the Utah Jazz, kind of meh for the Toronto Raptors, and absolutely terrible for Team Canada. Which version do we get this year? It's best case, worst case. Kelly O edition coming up. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, September the 10th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10, going on 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the really bad website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors, and you can join us, as always, for free in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. The link is in the description of the podcast. It'd be lovely to see you join us over there. It's a great place to come hang as we all get very antsy for the return of the NBA season over in there. Join the Sicko Brigade over on the Discord. Of course, you can find the show for free wherever you get your podcast. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Go over to YouTube and support us over there as well. It's very much appreciated whenever you support the show, whoever you choose to do it. It's a lovely thing. Helps me feel good, boost my ego, etc., etc. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we will get started here on another best case, worst case episode of the show as we finish off a multi-week series here this week. We'll talk about Kelly Olynyk today and what he might provide or not provide to the Toronto Raptors in their second units. Will he close games? Will he exclusively play as a stretch four, as he probably should? We're going to examine all of that today. Later in the week, we got Scotty Barnes talk, and then the team as a whole. What are the team's best and worst case outcomes? We'll get to that as the week progresses. But let's begin with Kelly Olynyk and his best case outcome coming into this season. Look, it's maybe not the right way to look at it, but if in sort of the grand scheme of things, practically speaking, Kelly Olynyk was in fact the Toronto Raptors' biggest offseason addition. They got it done well before the offseason, of course, with the trade with the Jazz just ahead of the deadline, where they brought back Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji for the 29th pick, or what became the 29th pick. And they've signed Kelly Olynyk to a 2-year extension, $13 million a year. He was their big offseason addition. Davion Mitchell, of course, falls into this bucket as well. But Kelly Olynyk is being asked to be a pretty important part of this team. And I do think there's a best case scenario where he's used optimally, where he can kind of replicate the effect he had for the Utah Jazz over the past couple seasons as just a really, really nice complementary piece who helps grease the wheels of the offense and just kind of sets the floor to play competent, developmentally friendly basketball. Last year, his on-off numbers weren't amazing with the Utah Jazz. They were actually the exact same as they were with the Raptors. The Jazz and Raptors were both 1.5 points per 100 possessions worse when he was on the floor versus when he was off. But again, you got to take into context of who he's playing with, the teams that he was on, et cetera, et cetera. The season prior, this is sort of, I think, the best case outcome for Kelly Olynyk, which is back in the 2022-23 season. The Jazz were plus 3.6 points per 100 possessions better when he was on the floor versus when he sat. He made their second units way more effective and was able to drive positive winning basketball when he was out there for a Jazz team that, until they decided to trade Mike Conley and go down the tubes, was a pretty plucky, kind of a punch above their weight, fun story of a team for the first half of that season. That, I think, is what you're looking at as the best case outcome here for Kelly Olynyk and what he might be able to provide. I think you got to throw out what we saw last year as far as the struggles with the Raptors. The Raptors stunk when he was on the floor last year, mostly because when he was on the floor last year, a giant chunk of that was post-March 1st, when Scotty Barnes and Jakob Poeltl weren't available. RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley both missed time. And Kelly Olynyk was very often asked to be the single best player on the Toronto Raptors. That's not going to win you a lot of games or minutes. The Raptors were a minus 13.2 net rating with him on the floor. It makes sense. It didn't go super hot with him, but I think playing with, 4 or 5 far superior players to him and them being available and healthy should produce better results for Kelly Olynyk. And I do think the best case outcome here is that we see him playing some lineups where he's like essentially the sixth man on this team. And some of the lineups he's in end up becoming core groups the Raptors lean on, potentially even to close games, right? I think the Emmanuel Quickley, Grady Dick, Scotty Barnes, Kelly Olynyk, Jakob Poeltl lineup is pretty interesting. Tons of shooting out there, maybe defensively challenged, but you've got Yak and Scotty out there. You could swap in RJ Barrett for Grady Dick and have a pretty interesting potential closing lineup there, which I think we'll see actually quite a bit. I don't think Grady's going to close every game, even though I think he'll be given a shot to do it. I think the size that Kelly Olynyk brings to the table, he's 7 feet tall. He's not the most spry or laterally quick guy in the world. He's not an incredible rim protector, and we'll get into some of the really gross numbers when he's playing the 5, which is something the Raptors have to avoid like the plague this season if they can at all. But just having someone who's 7 feet and operating as kind of a traditional stretch 4 can be a really valuable thing for this team, which is so in need of guys who are over 6'5" and guys who can shoot. I think there are going to be ways in which Kelly makes a lot of sense. I think Kelly Yak lineup should be pretty effective. We barely got to see those last year. I think there's something there, especially if you can dot Scotty Barnes around with those two guys, have that extra sort of help side rim protection in there. Maybe you sprinkle in some Davion Mitchell for some nasty point of attack defense. Maybe Jonathan Mogbo becomes someone who gets into some lineups. I actually think there's some really interesting potential lineups with Scotty Barnes, Jonathan Mogbo, and Kelly Olynyk together as your 3-4-5, where Kelly is not really asked to be the nominal rim protector type. He can be your stretch 4, and you have Mogbo and Scotty there to fill in the rebounding gaps and, of course, the rim protection gaps that Kelly Olynyk brings to the table. I think that's, in a best case outcome, a lineup we see a ton that becomes kind of a core backbone of Raptors second units, similar to, I think, we're going to see quickly Poeltl, I think, or we should hopefully see that be the backbone of some in-between transitional lineups for this team. I would hope that we see a similar thing with Scotty Kelly lineups. I think those guys' skills complement one another. I think the strengths of Scotty help compensate for Kelly's weaknesses and vice versa. And I think those can be some pretty interesting tandems that you pair sort of star and big to keep effective, competent lineups on the floor all season long. I think there's a world where Kelly really pops in this role as the sixth man who gets to play a lot of heavy minutes and offer a lot of offensive juice to this team. And he kind of plays himself into the fringe of the sixth man of the year conversation. He's done that once before back in 2017-18. He was sixth in sixth man of the year voting for the Miami Heat. He's been a very nice bench contributor for many years now. He's certainly not a stranger to being in the fringes of this conversation. I think we could see that if everything really hits here. And I think in sort of the pie in the sky, best case outcome here, Kelly Olynyk has a really nice season playing as a sort of nominal stretch 4 type. And by the time the deadline rolls around, maybe the Raptors aren't very good, but if Kelly Olynyk's playing well and his minutes aren't a train wreck when he's out there, I could see some contender doing what it seemed like a lot of contenders were doing last year with Kelly Olynyk and looking at him as a potential late season stretch run addition. The Oklahoma City Thunder were a team that were rumored to be kind of in on the Kelly Olynyk sweepstakes last year. It didn't work out. Maybe it's different now that they have Isaiah Hartenstein, but certainly they could use size and shooting. Any team can use size and shooting, even if the defense is a bit light. Maybe not super playoff proof in the case of Kelly Olynyk. That's something you got to consider, of course, if you're a team trading for him. But another team that stands out is the Golden State Warriors, who seem like they're going to try to make the best that they can of an effort around Steph Curry to go and try to make the twilight of his career as successful as possible. They were really in on Lauri Markkanen. Kelly Olynyk is kind of like dollar store Lauri Markkanen at this point, with a little bit more playmaking chops, of course. Maybe he's someone that the Warriors go in and covet to try to bring in as an extra piece in their sort of gaggle of really interesting role players. There could be a market for Kelly Olynyk come the deadline. And if that's the case, I've made my case for why the Raptors shouldn't be in the business of trading Jakob Poeltl for futures or something like that. But I think Kelly Olynyk's a different case, right? He's an older guy. He's going to be 33, or he is 33. He's someone who is not going to be part of the long-term core of this team, and he's less essential to the basic function of the team than Jakob Poeltl is. And so if you can trade a guy who's in his 30s, who you only have for 1 year on the books beyond this one, and some team wants to throw a first-round pick at you for him, I think you probably do it. And I think that's a pretty great way for this thing to work out for the Raptors. And if it doesn't, then you just have a nice bench player on your team who you're happy paying $13 million a year to for this and next season, and you're not feeling too worried about it. Again, there's a lot to happen between now and the deadline, but that to me feels like the best case outcome here for Kelly Olynyk because he plays well enough that he might warrant a first round pick come trade deadline time, depending on, of course, the landscape of where things sit, what teams feel like they're in it. All these dynamics shift over the course of the many months between now and February, but it's something to keep an eye on. And if it does pass, I think that is a real best case outcome for the Raptors, where they turn Kelly Olynyk into something else that might fit into their future plans. Not to say that Kelly can't, because I think he can be a very useful player for this team and help them to play competent, developmentally friendly basketball for the next 2 seasons. But if he's good enough this year that you can turn him into something or a player or a future pick or something that might help you further advance the Scotty Barnes era, I think that's something you got to look at. And again, that is a best case outcome here for Kelly Olynyk in his first full season with the Raptors. We're going to come back on the other side and talk about how this goes poorly, how this goes awry. What is the worst case scenario? I think it has something to do with him being asked to play way too much of the 5. We'll get to that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. And look, your kids are back at school if you have kids, or, all the kids are back out there. But if you're an adult and you've maybe lost that sense of curiosity, the lost of sense of learning and wanting to add new things to your skill set, therapy can be something that helps you get kind of back aligned with the things that you want to do and reconnect you with your sense of wonder, because back to school cannot just be for children. It can be for anyone at any age. It's a beautiful thing. Learning and adding new skills is always a wonderful thing. And if you don't have the time to prioritize it, a therapist can help you find that time and make sure you're doing things with your time that are benefiting you and making you feel like you're getting the most out of life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Back at it here with your Tuesday edition of Locked On Raptors. Just a heads up, next week we return to daily episodes Monday through Friday. We will, of course, be ratcheting things up as the season draws near. Media Day just a couple weeks away. It's getting close. It's very exciting. So yeah, back to daily next week. You have that to look forward to. Also, go check out Locked On Leafs, show with our pals Mike and Dave, who are covering the Buds as they get ready for their season as well. Even closer, just a couple weeks away from that season starting in earnest. And there's lots of intrigue, as always, around those damn Buds. All right, let's continue on here. Kelly Olynyk, worst case scenario. And look, you don't got to look far to see a worst case outcome for Kelly Olynyk. Just a month ago, Team Canada did not do so hot at the Olympics, and Kelly Olynyk, Captain Canada, the guy who's been part of this program for a very long time, was essentially a non-factor in that tournament. When he played, he didn't play very well, and eventually he just kind of got excised from the rotation. And when you couple that with the fact that he's 33 years old, with the fact that he, to no fault of his own, was unable to carry the Raptors to anything better than being totally miserable down the stretch last season, you can understand why there might be some fear that Kelly Olynyk is getting closer and closer to the brink of being cooked. I don't think he's cooked. I will get into it here. I don't think this worst case outcome is the most likely thing to happen here, but I do think it's worth discussing because we just saw Kelly Olynyk look like a total non-factor. And if Kelly Olynyk is a total non-factor for the Raptors this season, it's a big problem. He makes $13 million a year. You just traded a first-round pick for him. Not that I'm upset about it. I think that trade, perfectly fine process, and getting someone who's helpful to developing your younger players who matter on this team is totally fine gamble. Some people are more in on Ochai Agbaji than I am, and if he pops, that's great. It makes the trade totally worth it. I think the trade's worth it on its own for Kelly Olynyk, but if he's really, really bad this season, then that obviously paints that trade in a different light as well. And I do think, going into the Canada stuff, I just can't take what happened in that tournament to mean a whole lot for what Kelly Olynyk's going to do in the NBA. There are reasons why Kelly Olynyk might struggle in the NBA. We'll get into those, but the struggles with Team Canada feel pretty predictable, honestly, and make a lot of sense with how that roster was built. That team was simply not designed for Kelly Olynyk to be all that effective. There was no traditional big to count on. It was Dwight Powell and Khem Birch, fine players, but not guys that you're eager to have out there sort of backstopping Kelly Olynyk's issues at the 4 defensively. If you had more of a traditional rim protector type, if you had Zach Edey out there, then Kelly Olynyk probably looks a lot better, much like I think he's going to look a lot better playing with Jakob Poeltl for heavy minutes this season if they share the floor together. This team also, the Team Canada also had an abundance of wings, right? And I think Jordy Fernandez was right to play Dylan Brooks and RJ Barrett and Lou Dort on down the line at the 4 in lieu of Kelly Olynyk, because like it's just lean into the strength of your team. You have athletic, score first, defensively stout wings, go play them a lot, have one traditional big. And it just did not make sense for Kelly Olynyk to ever really be that traditional big because he's not very good as a center anymore. And that is where the risk of this season becoming kind of a disaster for Kelly Olynyk lies. And it really, to me, it all is on the plate of Darko Rajakovic and whether he properly deploys Kelly Olynyk. I do not think Kelly Olynyk can play the 5 for more than spot stretches for the Raptors this season. I think Bruno Fernando, I think Jonathan Mogbo, I think Scotty Barnes are all better options to play as the nominal 5 in the Raptors defense over Kelly Olynyk. Those guys can play with Kelly and have Kelly be the sort of traditional 4. I think that's fine. But you cannot be rolling out Kelly Olynyk as your nominal center, I think, for really any stretch of more than a couple minutes this season and matchup dependent, because he just is not a very good center. The Raptors' rebounding numbers totally cratered when Kelly Olynyk was on the floor last year. 45% of available rebounds went to the Raptors when he was out there. That means bad. That's really bad. It's a horrible, horrible rebounding percentage for a team over the course of a full game. If you're in like the 48 to 52 range, like that's kind of where everybody tends to slot in. It's not all that much difference in rebounding over the course of an 82 game season. Giving up 45 or 55% of all available rebounds when you're on the floor, not very good at all. And I don't think you can live with that kind of rebounding effect in your center. I think your center has to be able to grab boards. It's also why I think the Kelly Olynyk, Scotty Barnes, Jonathan Mogbo trio is interesting, because I think Scotty and Mogbo are both good rebounders. Mogbo might be like an exceptional rebounder for his size based on what he did in college. We'll have to see how it translates to the NBA. Maybe it doesn't happen this coming season, although everyone in the Discord knows I'm leading the Mogbo train. It's very exciting times. And I'm all in on Jonathan Mogbo being awesome. But I do think as a rookie, you got to temper expectations. But again, if you're going to play Kelly Olynyk out there, there's got to be rebounding support. And that's why I think him and Jakob Poeltl make sense as a duo. If you're going to close games with them, you have Poeltl's rebounding. He's an excellent offensive rebounder, very strong defensive rebounder. Scotty Barnes is an excellent rebounder himself. Even Emmanuel Quickley, I think, proved that he's got the juice to be kind of a better than his average guy at his position as a rebounder as well. There was a good sentence. So my hope is that you see Darko and the coaching staff deploy Kelly Olynyk as a 4 for like 95% of the minutes he plays. It's also like not just the rebounding stuff, right? It's the rim protection. Not something that Kelly Olynyk does very well. Last year, opponents shot 65% at the rim against Olynyk on about 5 attempts a game. This is inside 6 feet per NBA.com's tracking data, which I think is a pretty good sort of barometer for what a rim shot is, considering floaters and sort of those short push shots and stuff that have become kind of all the rage in the NBA these days. That feels like a rim shot today to me, as opposed to the 3 foot and in distinction you get from Basketball Reference. So inside 6 feet, 5 attempts a game, give up 65%. That's similar in terms of number of shots defended and percentage allowed as guys like Cam Thomas, Bruce Brown, Cade Cunningham, Keldon Johnson, guards who contested a similar number of shots as Kelly at the rim last year. He's just not a backstop of a defense. He is not a rim protector. And so unless you have a ton of other supplementary help rim protection out there with him, I think it's pretty hard to play him as a 5. Look, it might come to it that he has to play the 5. If Jakob Poeltl goes down, it's a disaster. Oh my God. If Jonathan Mogbo is not ready, if Bruno Fernando, who I think the Raptors seem to like and I think is going to make the team, but if he can't cut it as your backup 5, they might be stuck in a position where they have to play Kelly as Jakob Poeltl's backup. And if that's the case, I think you're going to get the worst case scenario for Kelly this season. He's not a 5 anymore. He's a traditional stretch 4. And yeah, the utility of traditional stretch 4s is maybe not what it used to be. If you're not a guy who can defend at the 4, you better be able to do stuff beyond just shooting. Look, Kelly does that. He's a good playmaker. You can run the stuff at the elbows with him that the Raptors love to run. He's going to average, 3-4 assists just by getting on the floor for regular minutes. That's an extra thing he provides, but his defense is always going to be a limiting factor. It's less of a limiting factor, though, if you have legit rim protection behind him in the form of Jakob Poeltl and Scotty Barnes out there roaming and lurking for blocks as well. And so, like, again, if Yak gets hurt, it could be a total disaster. And that's the case for the team in general. We talked about this last week, right? If he goes down, everything falls to crap for this team, as it did last year when they went 4-28 without him. If Yak's healthy and if one of Mogbo or Fernando can prove worthy of 10, 15 minutes of spot duty a night, then I think you're looking at a pretty harmonious situation for Kelly Olynyk to get the best out of him. But if he is forced to play the 5, that is how things go poorly here. And if he's forced to play the 5 and things do go as poorly as I think they will, if he's playing a lot of minutes as your nominal center, then you're looking at that contract of $13 million for 2 years as yet another misreading of the role player market by the Raptors. And you're looking at that deal as kind of a nuisance and a hindrance on your books for one more season beyond this. And you're not going to be able to parlay that into, an upgrade for the future, right? You're not going to be able to get that first round pick for Kelly Olynyk. You're probably not getting anything for Kelly Olynyk at $13 million if he's playing horribly and he's having a Team Canada level run through this season. You hope it doesn't happen. You hope the front office doesn't do the square peg round hole thing that they could do with some other guys on this team as well that we talked about with, say, Davion Mitchell at the point guard spot. You hope that Kelly Olynyk is able to just play the 4 and do the thing he's best at. But this roster is weirdly built, some weird holes, and just based on size, Kelly Olynyk is the most likely guy to kind of have to play some 5 in emergency duty. And I think that would be a really bad thing for Olynyk, for the Raptors, for everything. And so here's hoping we don't see that. We'll come back on the other side, get into what I think the most likely outcome is for Kelly Olynyk. And it's not super sexy, but it's a useful player. We'll get to that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Look, you've heard us talk about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, a whole lot here on this podcast. Well, we've got something a little different for you now. Through September the 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's a big deal. 3 weeks, that's like a pretty significant chunk of the season you're not paying for NFL Sunday Ticket. And with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, or you can cancel anytime. That is a wonderful thing. Of course, FanDuel also offers plenty of odds and lines for you to go and wager some money on if that's your thing. Maybe you want to put some monies on put some monies on the futures for the Toronto Raptors. Maybe you want to, okay, they're like 12,000 to 1 to win the title or whatever they're going to be. Go check it out over at FanDuel. Peruse those lines. Maybe you want to, just bet on individual games for the Raptors this season. Take the unders. Pick them to win or lose. It's all there for you. Go peruse over at FanDuel. They got a million things for you to bet on. If that is the thing you want to be doing with your time, just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sports book. And of course, they are the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. Rounding things out here with Kelly Olynyk. Most likely case scenario for this coming season. Before we get into that, just a reminder, Locked On NBA, go check it out. It's a very good show covering all of the biggest stuff going on in the NBA. Some talk about Jamal Murray's extension, among other things, over at Locked On NBA this week. Big stories. And of course, the season's drawing near. Lots of season preview stuff going on over there 5 days a week as well. All right. Most likely case for Kelly Olynyk in his first full season with the Toronto Raptors. And I think it basically goes as follows. He's a solid bench guy, struggles here and there when he has to play the 5, but mostly gets to play the 4. And his $13 million a year hit looks anywhere between slight overpay and completely fine. I think that's probably what we're looking at here with Kelly Olynyk. Again, mostly plays the 4. There will be some times where he has to play the 5 out of necessity or because they found looks that make some sense with supporting rim protection and rebounding to kind of prop him up. Fine. I'm not expecting him to go total sort of zero center plan for Kelly Olynyk this year. Like, he's going to have to play there at some point. He's like the second tallest player on the team. It's just going to have to happen. I've made my peace with that. But as long as we're not seeing prolonged stretches like we saw at the back part of last year, where he was essentially always playing the 5, always the biggest guy on the floor, then I think you can avoid the worst case outcome here with Kelly and just optimize him as a stretch 4. I think they'll be able to do that for, 80% of his minutes, 75% of his minutes. And if that happens, I think that's great. Maybe he's not someone who's driving huge positive minutes when he's on the floor, but is he driving the execution of competent, developmentally friendly basketball? I think that's totally on the table. And I think that's likely what's going to happen here with Kelly Olynyk. Basically like a slightly less impactful version of the Olynyk we saw play so well for the Jazz over the last couple seasons. That slightly less impactful element comes from he's going to be 33 and not 31 or 32 anymore. And age comes for everybody. You really hope that he's just not cooked and that the age curve is going to, sort of come crashing down on him. It's always possible with guys in their 30s, right? Like some guys just lose it and it just kind of happens overnight over the course of the summer and it's lost and it's just not there anymore. I don't think we're going to see that with Kelly necessarily. He's a guy who I think his game's going to age nicely. He shoots, he play makes, he does kind of old man stuff. I think that's a pretty sort of aging friendly style of play, but you can't count on it for sure because time is undefeated and all of that. I don't think he eventually plays himself into a guy who's worth a first round pick at the deadline, as much as I think that's a wonderful best case outcome. I think the most likely thing is if they are going to trade him, it's for a couple seconds, and they probably just hold off if that's the case and say, hey, like Kelly's useful. He's giving our bench units a nice look. He's an extra guy who's tall on this team that they badly need. He brings shooting to the table and space and passing and all these things. He's probably more valuable to us than he is to some contender giving up a bit of a paltry package for him. And so they keep him around for next season. And ultimately, I think everybody feels fine about him being on the team next year, making $13 million a year. I think if he gets into next season and is still looking effective and is doing the same things he was doing this year, then the next year's deadline becomes pretty interesting. Well, he'll be an expiring guy. Cap will have gone up a little bit more by then too. We'll see, kind of what the market for guys who make $13 million a year is going to be. I think it'll probably be pretty hot because that's like a movable salary in today's day and age. It's not like they have to trade him at this year's deadline. They have all the time in the world if they want to hang on and kind of see what they can get for Kelly down the line whilst he provides real benefit to the team while he's on it. And I do think we'll see him close a lot of games this season in place of Grady Dick. As much as I give Grady Dick all the runway in the world, I'm happy to see him play 25, 30 minutes a night just to see what he can do. I think the stuff he does on the floor is additive to what everyone else is trying to do among the core players on the team. But if he's not there defensively for crunch time, not to say Kelly Olynyk is some kind of ace to bring in, but again, the functional size he brings without losing much shooting, if you're swapping him in for Grady Dick, I think that is totally fine. And I think we'll see him close a good number of the close games the Raptors play, if in fact they're playing a lot of close games, which, hey, they might not. They might be kind of bad or very bad. On the scale of kind of bad to very bad to meh is sort of the spectrum of outcomes you're looking at here for the Raptors, probably. That's a look ahead to Friday's podcast as we look at the team's best and worst case outcomes. But that's kind of my read on the Kelly Olynyk situation. He'll close some games. He'll be fine, not amazing. He's not going to be some kind of 6 man of the year guy or anything like that. I think there's a chance that Bruce Brown or even Davion Mitchell kind of prove to be a better bench player off the season, or throughout the season than Kelly is. Kelly might be the best bench guy. I don't think he's going to blow everybody else away in that race, that very tense, exciting race that everyone in the NBA is going to have their eyes on of who is the best bench player on the Toronto Raptors, of course. He'll be in that conversation. I don't think he's going to be like a clear, oh God, this guy's one of the best 6 men in the world. That's a lot to ask for a guy who's 33, who is going to be playing potentially, a quarter of his minutes, a fifth of his minutes in pretty rough contexts, just kind of being asked to do stuff that he's not great at. You hope that they can survive the rebounding when he's out there. You could hope that they can survive the rim protection issues. If they put the right personnel around him, I think that's doable, but it's going to be a challenge for Darko and the staff all season long to kind of scheme and properly plot which lineups he's appearing in so you can get the best out of him. But that, I think, is something they can do. And hopefully they learn, right? If they run Kelly a bunch at the start of the season as a 5 and it's going horribly, you hope they pivot and stop doing that. We'll see. Again, this is like the sort of mystery box that is his coaching staff too, right? We don't know how they adjust to stuff. We don't know how they adapt on the fly. The best indication we got, I think, of Darko's adaptability was at the start of last year with Pascal Siakam, where he was not being used to sort of optimize his skills. And as the season went along, they started to use him more often out of the post, and that had great results. And the offense actually started to kind of find itself a little bit before the trades. hopefully it's something similar with Kelly Olynyk, where if they're using him in a place that's not optimizing what he's doing, they pivot and start to do something else. And that's all you can ask for from any coaching staff, I suppose. But that is just one other thing we don't know about this team coming in, is how to evaluate or predict how the coaching staff is going to respond to struggle and adjust on the fly, because we just didn't get any sample of that last season, because last year was an absolute crater of a season. With that, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for hanging out and listening to me wax about Kelly Olynyk. We'll be back again tomorrow to close off the player-specific version of best case, worst case, with, of course, one, Scotty Barnes. Yeah, we haven't talked about him yet. We saved him for last for a reason. We're going to get into Scotty Barnes with Katie Heindl tomorrow. Looking forward to that one, of course. And then Friday, Joe Wolfond from The Score, formerly of Pound the Rock, RIP Pound the Rock, is going to be on the show as we talk about the best and worst case outcomes for the team at large going into this season. Looking forward to that one very much as well. But in the meantime, follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Much appreciated. Wherever you support podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, please support us and do the things that the app or platform of your choosing asks you to do to support said podcast. It's very, very nice of you, and I'm forever in your debt if you go ahead and subscribe, write a comment, all that good stuff. Either way, have yourself a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you on Wednesday. Another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye. Oh my God, a disaster.